You thought the first 5 stories were terrifying? You haven't heard anything yet. The darkness on the streets runs deeper than most people realize. It's not just about finding shelter or staying warm. It's about staying alive when society has forgotten you exist. When you're invisible, predators see you clearly. And what you're about to hear will prove that some monsters don't hide under beds. They drive vans, run charities, and offer helping hands. These aren't urban legends or campfire tales. These are 5 more true stories that happened to real people who had nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. People who learn that when you have nothing left, you become everything to those who hunt the forgotten. So lock your doors, check your windows, and remember, home isn't just where the heart is, it's where the hunters can't reach you. In August 2018, Kevin Torres had been living on the streets of Las Vegas for 8 months. The desert heat was unbearable during the day, forcing him to seek shelter under bridges and in abandoned buildings. But it was the nights that truly tested his survival skills, not because of the cold, but because of what came hunting after dark. Kevin had learned to avoid the main tourist areas where security was tight and police were frequent. Instead, he stayed in the industrial districts on the outskirts of the city, where warehouses and empty lots provided some protection from both the elements and the authorities. It was there he met Elena, a middle-aged Hispanic woman who claimed to run a food distribution program for the homeless. She drove a beat-up Honda with Christian symbols hanging from the mirror and spoke with genuine warmth about helping those in need. "Mijo, you look hungry," she said, approaching Kevin near an abandoned gas station. "I have sandwiches, water, and some clothes that might fit you." Kevin was suspicious at first. 8 months on the streets had taught him that kindness often came with strings attached. But Elena seemed different. She didn't ask for anything in return, didn't preach about salvation or sobriety. She just handed him food and water, then told him she'd be back in a few days. True to her word, Elena returned 3 days later with more supplies. This time, she brought medication, over-the-counter painkillers for Kevin's chronic back pain, and antibiotics for an infected cut on his arm. "You don't have to live like this," she told him gently. "I know a place where you can get back on your feet. Clean beds, hot showers, 3 meals a day. No questions asked, no paperwork required." Kevin had heard promises like this before from various charities and shelters, and they never lived up to the hype. But Elena was persistent, visiting him every few days for 3 weeks. She never pressured him, never made him feel judged. Slowly, Kevin began to trust her. The breaking point came when the temperature hit 118 degrees and Kevin collapsed from heat exhaustion. Elena found him unconscious behind a dumpster and took him to a hospital. When he woke up, she was sitting beside his bed. "This ends now," she said firmly. "You're coming with me tonight." The facility Elena took him to was nothing like the overcrowded, dangerous shelters Kevin had avoided. It was a converted ranch house about 30 miles outside Las Vegas, surrounded by desert but well-maintained and clean. Inside, about 15 other homeless individuals were living in what seemed like genuine comfort. "We call it Haven Ranch," Elena explained. "Everyone here contributes what they can. Cleaning, cooking, maintenance work. In exchange, you get food, shelter, and time to figure out your next steps." For the first week, it felt like paradise. Kevin had his own room, regular meals, and even access to a computer to look for jobs. The other residents seemed genuinely happy, and Elena treated everyone with respect and dignity. But then Kevin started noticing the cameras. They were small, hidden in corners and behind picture frames. But once he spotted the first one, he saw them everywhere, watching the common areas, the bedrooms, even the bathrooms. When he mentioned this to his roommate Jake, the man's reaction was strange. "Don't ask questions you don't want answers to," Jake whispered, looking around nervously. "Just keep your head down and be grateful." Kevin's unease grew when he realized that some residents had been there for years, not just temporarily as Elena had described. And there were rules that hadn't been mentioned during his orientation. No one was allowed to leave the property without permission. No phone calls to family or friends. No visitors allowed. The truth began to emerge during Kevin's third week at the ranch. He was walking past Elena's office late one night when he heard her on the phone with someone, speaking in a language that definitely wasn't Spanish despite her claimed heritage. "Yes, the American one is ready for harvest," she was saying. "Type AB negative. Excellent physical condition. The buyer in Tijuana is prepared to pay full price." Kevin's blood went cold. He crept closer to the door and heard Elena continue. "We'll have the surgery done this weekend. Clean extraction. No complications. The donor won't survive, but that's acceptable given the profit margin." Kevin understood with horrible clarity what Haven Ranch really was. It wasn't a homeless shelter. It was a body parts farm. Elena had been hunting healthy homeless people, fattening them up, and then harvesting their organs for sale on the black market. He needed to escape immediately. But the ranch was 30 miles from anywhere, surrounded by desert that could kill him within hours during the day. His only chance was to leave at night and try to make it to the highway before anyone realized he was gone. Kevin waited until 3 a.m., then slipped out through a window in the laundry room. He had filled water bottles and stolen some food, but he knew it wouldn't be enough if he got lost in the desert. He had been walking for 2 hours when he heard the vehicles behind him. Elena and her crew had discovered his escape and were hunting him with ATVs and spotlights. Kevin left the dirt road and ran into the desert, hoping the rocky terrain would slow them down. The chase lasted until dawn. Kevin hid behind boulders and in dry creek beds while the searchers combed the area around him. As the sun rose and the temperature began to climb, Kevin knew he was running out of time. The desert heat would kill him long before he reached help. That's when he saw the Border Patrol vehicle. Kevin had always avoided law enforcement, but now he ran toward it, screaming and waving his arms. The agents were initially suspicious. Kevin looked like he was high on drugs or having a mental breakdown. But his terror was so genuine that they called for backup and investigated his claims. When authorities raided Haven Ranch, they found a fully equipped surgical suite hidden in the basement. Elena, whose real name was Dr. Anya Volkov, was a disgraced Russian surgeon who had been harvesting organs from vulnerable populations for over a decade. Police discovered evidence of at least 23 victims, all homeless individuals who had been lured to the ranch with promises of help. Their organs had been sold to wealthy patients in Mexico and South America who couldn't wait for legal transplants. Dr. Volkov was arrested and eventually extradited to Russia, where she faced additional charges for similar operations in Moscow and St. Petersburg. But authorities believe her network included multiple facilities across the American Southwest and that similar operations might still be active. Kevin survived because he trusted his instincts when something felt wrong. But he learned that predators specifically target homeless people because they're already isolated from society. People who disappear without anyone looking for them. And somewhere in the desert Southwest, there might be other ranch houses, other fake charities, still harvesting the forgotten. In March 2019, Jennifer Walsh had been homeless in Portland, Oregon for 5 months. The Pacific Northwest's relentless rain and cold had worn her down to nothing, and the city's homeless camps were becoming increasingly dangerous as drug use and mental illness created volatile situations. Jennifer tried to avoid the camps, instead sleeping in doorways and under highway overpasses. But staying dry was nearly impossible. and she was developing a cough that was getting worse every day. She needed real shelter before pneumonia set in. That's when she met the couple who called themselves Brother Michael and Sister Ruth. They drove an old school bus painted white with religious symbols, and they claimed to be missionaries helping homeless people find spiritual and physical healing. "God has brought us to you, sister," Brother Michael said when he approached Jennifer near a downtown parking garage. "We have a community where lost souls can find redemption and recovery." Jennifer was atheist and had no interest in religious conversion, but Sister Ruth seemed to understand her reluctance. "We don't force anyone to believe," she said gently. "We just provide a safe place to heal while you figure out your next steps. No strings attached." The community they described was located on a remote farm about 2 hours outside Portland, a place where homeless individuals could live and work while getting back on their feet. They offered Jennifer a ride to see the place, with no commitment required. The farm was more isolated than Jennifer had expected, surrounded by dense forest with only one road in and out. But the facilities were impressive. A large house, several outbuildings, and what looked like a thriving agricultural operation. About 30 people were living there, all former homeless individuals, according to Brother Michael. "Everyone contributes according to their abilities," he explained. "Some work in the fields, others handle cooking and cleaning. We're completely self-sufficient here." The people Jennifer met seemed genuinely content. They had clean clothes, healthy color in their faces, and spoke enthusiastically about how the community had saved their lives. Several told her they had been homeless for years before finding this place. Jennifer was assigned a bed in the women's dormitory and given work in the vegetable gardens. For the first few days, it felt like she had found exactly what she needed: regular meals, meaningful work, and people who treated her with dignity and respect. But gradually, she began noticing disturbing details. The farm was completely cut off from the outside world. No internet, no phone service, no television or radio. When Jennifer asked about contacting her sister to let her know she was safe, Brother Michael explained that outside communication wasn't allowed during the purification period. "You need time to cleanse yourself of the negative influences that led to your homelessness," he said. "Contact with the outside world will only pull you back into destructive patterns." More troubling was the medication everyone was required to take. Each morning, Sister Ruth would distribute pills that she claimed were vitamins and supplements to improve health and mental clarity. Jennifer noticed that people became very compliant and passive after taking them, losing the anger and desperation that had driven them on the streets. When Jennifer tried to refuse the medication, claiming she was allergic to unknown pills, Sister Ruth's kindness disappeared. "Everyone takes their medicine," she said coldly. "It's not optional." That night, Jennifer's food tasted strange, bitter, and metallic. Within an hour, she felt dizzy and confused, struggling to think clearly. She realized they had drugged her food when she refused the pills. As the days passed, Jennifer began to understand what was really happening at the farm. The residents weren't recovering from homelessness. Any two. They were being slowly brainwashed and drugged into compliance. People who had been there longer moved like zombies, following orders without question and showing no interest in leaving. But the worst discovery came when Jennifer was assigned to work in the basement storage area. While moving boxes, she found a room that contained dozens of identification documents, driver's licenses, social security cards, and birth certificates, all belonging to people who had supposedly graduated from the program and moved on to better lives. Jennifer recognized some of the names, people who had been at the farm when she arrived, who had supposedly left for job placements in other cities. But their IDs were still here, along with credit cards and other personal documents they would never have left behind willingly. That night, Jennifer pretended to take her medication but hid the pills under her tongue, spitting them out later. As her mind cleared over the next few days, she realized she needed to escape immediately before she became another ID in that basement storage room. The challenge was the isolation. The farm was surrounded by miles of dense forest, and the only road was closely monitored. Jennifer would have to escape on foot through the wilderness and somehow find her way to civilization. Her opportunity came during a rainstorm when visibility was low and the guards were distracted. Jennifer slipped away from her work detail and ran into the forest, hoping to find the main road by following power lines she had seen from the farm. She walked through the night, soaked and freezing, stumbling through undergrowth and trying to stay oriented. By morning, she was completely lost and close to hypothermia. But then she heard the sound of traffic and managed to reach a highway, where a trucker picked her up and took her to a police station. When authorities investigated the farm, they found a sophisticated brainwashing operation disguised as a religious commune. Brother Michael and Sister Ruth, whose real names were Dr. James Peterson and Dr. Linda Morrison, were former psychiatrists who had lost their licenses for unethical experimentation on patients. They had been using the farm to conduct illegal psychological research, testing drugs and brainwashing techniques on homeless subjects who wouldn't be missed by society. The ultimate goal was to create a completely compliant workforce that could be sold to agricultural operations and factories throughout the region. Police found evidence of at least 40 victims over 3 years. Some had been sold as virtual slaves to other operations. Others who showed resistance or tried to escape had simply disappeared. Investigators found several unmarked graves in the forest surrounding the farm. Dr. Peterson and Dr. Morrison were sentenced to life in prison, but they had been part of a larger network of researchers conducting similar experiments. Authorities believe there are other facilities, other fake communes and charities, still operating in remote areas throughout the Pacific Northwest. Jennifer survived because she stayed alert and trusted her instincts when something felt wrong. But she learned that some predators don't just want to hurt homeless people. They want to erase their minds and turn them into property. And in the deep forests of America, there might still be farms where lost souls are harvested for more than just their organs. In June 2020, Robert Bobby Martinez had been homeless in Miami for almost a year. The pandemic had made everything worse. Shelters were closed or operating at limited capacity, and the few services available for homeless individuals had been cut back dramatically. Bobby survived by doing odd jobs for cash and sleeping wherever he could avoid police sweeps. The Florida heat was brutal, but it was the hurricanes that really scared Bobby. Hurricane season was starting, and he had nowhere safe to ride out a major storm. That's when he heard about the Hurricane Haven program being advertised by volunteers throughout the homeless community. Hurricane Haven claimed to provide temporary emergency shelter for homeless individuals during severe weather events. Unlike regular shelters that had strict rules and limited space, Hurricane Haven supposedly had room for everyone and no restrictions on length of stay during emergencies. The volunteer who approached Bobby was a young woman named Amanda, who seemed genuinely concerned about his safety. She explained that Hurricane Haven operated out of a large warehouse facility near the port, fully stocked with food, water, medical supplies, and comfortable sleeping arrangements. "We don't just warehouse people during storms," Amanda explained. "We provide comprehensive services, job placement assistance, addiction counseling, mental health support. Many people use the emergency shelter as a stepping stone to permanent housing." Bobby was skeptical, but when the National Weather Service issued a hurricane watch for South Florida, he didn't have many options. Amanda picked him up in a van, along with 6 other homeless individuals, and they drove to the warehouse district near the Miami port. The Hurricane Haven facility was impressive, a converted warehouse with hundreds of cots, industrial kitchens, recreational areas, and what appeared to be medical facilities. About 200 homeless people were already there, and more vans were arriving constantly. "We're prepared for up to 500 evacuees," explained the facility director, a man who introduced himself as Dr. Harrison. "Everyone gets 3 meals a day, medical attention if needed, and access to our social services team." For the first day, Hurricane Haven seemed like exactly what it claimed to be. Bobby had a clean cot, hot meals, and even access to showers and laundry facilities. The staff was professional and caring, and Bobby began to believe he might have found a way off the streets permanently. But as the hurricane approached and the facility filled up, Bobby started noticing strange things. The warehouse had no windows, and all the exits were controlled by security guards. People weren't allowed to leave, even briefly, once they were checked in. "It's for safety during the storm," Amanda explained when Bobby asked about the restrictions. "We can't have people wandering around outside in dangerous weather." More disturbing was the medical screening everyone underwent. Dr. Harrison claimed it was routine health checks to prevent disease outbreaks in the crowded facility, but the examinations were unusually thorough. Blood samples, detailed medical histories, and physical measurements that seemed unnecessary for basic health screening. Bobby also noticed that some people who had been there since before his arrival were gone, and when he asked about them, staff gave vague explanations about transfers to other facilities or successful job placements. But the timing was suspicious. People disappearing in the middle of a hurricane warning when no one could travel safely. The truth began to emerge on the second night, when Bobby couldn't sleep due to the storm noise and decided to explore the facility. He discovered that the warehouse extended much further back than the public areas, and there were sections that were clearly off-limits to evacuees. Through a partially open door, Bobby saw what looked like a medical facility, surgical equipment, hospital beds, and people in scrubs working on someone who was unconscious on an operating table. He got closer and realized with horror that he recognized the person on the table. It was Frank, an elderly homeless man who had arrived the same day as Bobby. Frank was having surgery, but this wasn't emergency medical care. Someone was systematically removing his organs while he was still alive. Bobby backed away in shock and tried to process what he had seen. Hurricane Haven wasn't a shelter. It was a trap designed to collect vulnerable homeless people during emergencies when they would be desperate enough to go anywhere for safety. The hurricane provided perfect cover. Anyone who went missing could be assumed to have died in the storm. Bobby knew he had to escape immediately, but the facility was locked down and surrounded by flooded streets as the hurricane made landfall. His only chance was to hide until the storm passed, and then try to slip away in the chaos of cleanup operations. He spent 2 days hiding in a storage room, surviving on water and crackers he had stolen from the kitchen. During that time, he heard trucks arriving and leaving despite the dangerous weather, and he could only imagine what cargo they were carrying. When the hurricane passed and the facility began releasing evacuees, Bobby mixed in with a group being transported to a Red Cross shelter. As soon as the van stopped, he ran. He didn't stop running until he reached a police station, where he told his story to detectives who initially thought he was suffering from storm-related trauma or hallucinations. But Bobby's description of the facility and the people involved was so detailed and consistent that investigators decided to check it out. When they raided the warehouse, they found a sophisticated organ harvesting operation that had been using natural disasters as cover for collecting victims. Dr. Harrison wasn't a real doctor. His name was Marcus Webb, and he was part of an international organ trafficking network that specifically targeted vulnerable populations during emergencies. The Hurricane Haven program had been operating for 3 years, using major storms as opportunities to collect homeless individuals who could disappear without investigation. Police found evidence that at least 60 people had been killed for their organs during previous emergency shelter operations. The victims were all homeless individuals who had sought shelter during hurricanes, floods, and other disasters. Their disappearances were written off as storm casualties. Webb and his associates were arrested, but authorities believe the network included similar operations in other hurricane-prone areas. Emergency shelters that appeared during disasters collect the most vulnerable people and disappear again when the crisis ends. Bobby survived because he stayed alert and trusted his instincts when something felt wrong. But he learned that predators use disasters as hunting opportunities, knowing that desperate people will accept help from anyone during emergencies. And every hurricane season, in coastal cities throughout the South, there might be other fake shelters waiting for the next storm to bring them fresh victims. In October 2017, Michael Thompson had been homeless in Denver, Colorado for 6 months after losing his construction job and falling behind on rent. The Rocky Mountain winter was approaching fast, and Michael knew he wouldn't survive sleeping rough once the snow started falling. Denver's homeless shelters were notoriously overcrowded and dangerous, with long waiting lists and strict rules that eliminated many people who needed help. Michael had been turned away from 3 different facilities, either because they were full or because his criminal record, a single drug possession charge from 5 years earlier, disqualified him from their programs. That's when he met Pastor Jim and the Rocky Mountain Rescue Mission volunteers. They weren't affiliated with any of the established shelters, instead operating what they called a mobile ministry that served homeless individuals wherever they were found. "Son, you don't have to freeze to death out here," Pastor Jim said when he approached Michael near Union Station. "God has provided us with resources to help folks like yourself through the winter months." Pastor Jim explained that Rocky Mountain Rescue Mission operated several small facilities throughout the Denver area, specifically designed for people who couldn't access traditional shelters due to background checks, sobriety requirements, or other restrictions. "We believe everyone deserves a warm place to sleep and a hot meal," he said. "No judgment, no paperwork, no hoops to jump through. Just Christian charity in its purest form." The facility Pastor Jim showed Michael was a converted motel on the outskirts of Denver, nestled in the foothills where land was cheap and neighbors were few. About 20 homeless individuals were staying there, and everyone seemed grateful for the warm beds and regular meals. "Everyone contributes what they can," explained Sarah, Pastor Jim's wife, who managed the day-to-day operations. "Some folks help with cooking and cleaning. Others do maintenance work around the property. We're like a big family here." Michael was assigned a room and immediately felt more hopeful than he had in months. The facility was clean, the food was good, and the other residents were friendly. Pastor Jim conducted evening prayer services, but attendance wasn't mandatory, and no one pressured Michael about his lack of religious faith. But after a week, Michael began noticing strange details about the operation. The motel was extremely isolated, with no public transportation and no businesses within walking distance. Residents weren't allowed to leave the property without permission, which Pastor Jim explained was for insurance purposes. "We're liable if someone gets hurt or causes problems in town," he said. "It's just easier if everyone stays on the property unless they have a specific reason to leave." More troubling was the work program that all residents were required to participate in. During the day, groups of residents were taken in vans to job sites throughout the Denver metro area, construction projects, warehouse work, and agricultural labor. But none of the residents ever seemed to receive payment for their work. When Michael asked about wages, Pastor Jim explained that all earnings went into a collective fund used to operate the facility and provide for everyone's needs. "We're a communal family," he said. "Individual money just creates jealousy and conflict." Michael might have accepted this explanation, but he recognized some of the job sites they were taken to. These were legitimate construction projects where workers normally earned $15-20 per hour. If 20 residents were working full-time jobs, the facility should have been generating thousands of dollars per week in income. Yet the food was cheap, The facilities were basic, and residents wore donated clothing that was often inadequate for Colorado's harsh weather. Where was all the money going? The answer became clear when Michael overheard Pastor Jim on the phone with someone, discussing labor contracts and profit margins in language that had nothing to do with Christian charity. "We can provide 50 workers for the mall construction project," Pastor Jim was saying. "They'll work for room and board, no wages required." Yes, I understand the savings compared to union labor. Michael realized that Rocky Mountain Rescue Mission wasn't a charity at all. It was a labor trafficking operation that used religious rhetoric to justify keeping homeless people as unpaid workers. Pastor Jim was contracting out his residents as slave labor to construction companies and other businesses that wanted to avoid paying legitimate wages. But the situation was even worse than simple exploitation. Michael discovered that residents who complained about conditions or asked too many questions had a tendency to disappear. Pastor Jim would announce they had found permanent housing or reconnected with family, but their personal belongings would still be in their rooms. One night, Michael witnessed what really happened to troublemakers. He was returning from the bathroom when he saw Pastor Jim and two other men dragging an unconscious resident named Pete toward a van. Pete had been asking questions about wages and talking about contacting labor authorities. Michael hid and watched as they loaded Pete into the van and drove away. Pete never came back, and the next morning Pastor Jim announced that Pete had decided to relocate to California for a new job opportunity. Michael knew he had to escape before he became another success story. But the isolated location made it nearly impossible. The nearest town was 15 miles away through mountainous terrain that would be deadly in winter conditions without proper equipment. His chance came during a supply run to Denver when he was part of a work crew renovating an office building. While Pastor Jim was distracted negotiating with the foreman, Michael slipped away from the job site and ran to the nearest police station. Initially, police were skeptical of Michael's claims. Labor trafficking was difficult to prove, and Pastor Jim had been operating in the area for years without complaints. But Michael's detailed knowledge of the operation and specific information about job sites convinced detectives to investigate. When authorities raided the Rocky Mountain Rescue Mission facility, they found a sophisticated slavery operation disguised as a religious charity. Pastor Jim, whose real name was James Morrison, had been trafficking homeless individuals for labor exploitation for over 5 years. The investigation revealed that Morrison had contracts with dozens of businesses throughout the Denver area, providing cut-rate labor by using homeless workers who received no wages. Companies saved thousands of dollars in labor costs, while Morrison pocketed the difference. Police found evidence of at least 30 victims over the years. Some had been worked to death in dangerous conditions. Others who tried to escape or complained about treatment had been murdered and buried in remote locations in the mountains. Morrison had been targeting homeless individuals specifically because they were unlikely to be reported missing. Morrison was sentenced to life in prison for human trafficking and multiple murders, but authorities believe similar operations exist throughout the American West, using religious organizations and fake charities as fronts for slave labor operations. Michael survived because he recognized the signs of exploitation and took action before it was too late. But he learned that some predators don't just hunt homeless people for organs or sexual exploitation, they hunt them for their labor, turning desperate people into unpaid slaves. And in remote locations throughout America, there might still be fake missions and charities where homeless people disappear into a different kind of hell. One where they're worked to death for someone else's profit. In November 2021, Ashley Rodriguez had been homeless in New Orleans for 3 months. Hurricane Ida had destroyed her apartment and displaced thousands of residents, creating a homeless crisis that overwhelmed the city's already inadequate shelter system. Ashley lived in a tent city under an interstate overpass, trying to stay safe while navigating the complex bureaucracy of disaster relief. The conditions in the tent city were deteriorating rapidly. Overcrowding, poor sanitation, and lack of security had created a dangerous environment where violence and theft were common. Ashley was particularly vulnerable as a young woman on her own, and she knew she needed to find alternative shelter before something terrible happened. That's when she met Dr. Rebecca Martinez and the Disaster Relief Medical Outreach Team. They had set up a mobile clinic near the tent city, providing free medical care and social services to homeless hurricane survivors. "We're not just treating symptoms, Dr. Martinez explained when Ashley came to the clinic for treatment of a persistent cough. "We're providing comprehensive care that addresses the root causes of homelessness and helps people rebuild their lives." Dr. Martinez was impressive. A licensed physician with credentials from Tulane University Medical School, who seemed genuinely committed to helping hurricane victims. She explained that her organization operated a residential treatment facility where homeless individuals could receive intensive medical and psychological care while working toward permanent housing solutions. "It's not like a regular shelter, Doctor," Martinez said. "We provide individualized treatment plans, job training, addiction counseling, and mental health services. Our success rate for permanent housing placement is over 90%. The facility was located in a converted mansion in the Garden District that had been donated by a wealthy family after Hurricane Katrina. It looked legitimate and professional, with medical equipment, comfortable living spaces, and a staff of nurses and social workers. Ashley was assigned a private room and immediately felt safer than she had in months. The facility housed about 30 people, all hurricane survivors who were receiving various types of treatment and support services. Everyone seemed to be making genuine progress toward getting back on their feet. But after a few days, Ashley began noticing inconsistencies in the operation. Despite being a medical facility, there were very few actual medical treatments being provided. Instead, residents spent most of their time in group therapy sessions and research participation activities that involved extensive questionnaires and psychological testing. Dr. Martinez explained that the psychological work was necessary for trauma recovery. Hurricane survivors often experience PTSD and other mental health issues that prevent them from successfully transitioning to permanent housing. She said, "We need to address these underlying problems first." Ashley might have accepted this explanation, but she had studied psychology in college before her life fell apart, and the therapy sessions seemed more like interrogations than treatment. Dr. Plus. Martinez and her staff asked extremely detailed questions about residents' backgrounds, family histories, financial situations, and personal relationships. More disturbing was the medication regimen that all residents were required to follow. Dr. Martinez claimed the pills were necessary for treating trauma and depression, but Ashley noticed that people became increasingly passive and compliant after taking them for several days. When Ashley tried to research the medications online, she discovered that internet access was blocked at the facility. Dr. Storr. Martinez explained that social media and news consumption could trigger trauma responses and interfere with recovery, but Ashley suspected there were other reasons for the information blackout. The truth began to emerge when Ashley overheard a phone conversation between Dr. Martinez and someone she was obviously reporting to. They were discussing residents not as patients, but as test subjects in some kind of research study. Subject 27 is responding well to the new dosage. Dr. Martinez was saying, "We should be able to complete the behavioral modification protocols within another 2 weeks. The client in Switzerland is very interested in purchasing her contract." Ashley realized with horror that the facility wasn't providing medical treatment. It was conducting illegal human experimentation. Dr. Supporter. Martinez was using hurricane survivors as test subjects for psychological manipulation and behavior modification research, then selling the trained subjects to wealthy buyers overseas. The disaster relief operation was a front for human trafficking, specifically targeting people who had lost everything in the hurricane and were desperate enough to accept help from anyone. The victims were being psychologically broken down and rebuilt according to specifications provided by buyers who wanted compliant servants, or worse. Ashley knew she had to escape immediately, but the facility was closely monitored, and the medication was affecting her ability to think clearly. She started pretending to take her pills while actually hiding them, and gradually her mind began to clear enough to plan an escape. Her opportunity came during a group therapy session when a fire alarm malfunctioned and created confusion throughout the building. While staff were distracted dealing with the alarm system, Ashley slipped out through a kitchen door and ran. She made it to a police station and told her story, but initially officers were skeptical. Dr. Martinez had impeccable credentials and was well regarded in the New Orleans medical community. The facility appeared legitimate, and Ashley's claims seemed far-fetched. But Ashley's knowledge of specific details about the operation, including names of staff members and descriptions of the facility's layout, convinced detectives to investigate. When they searched the mansion, they found a sophisticated human trafficking operation disguised as a legitimate medical facility. Dr. Martinez wasn't just conducting unauthorized research. She was part of an international network that specialized in training vulnerable individuals for sale to wealthy clients who wanted personal servants they could control completely. The psychological manipulation techniques were designed to break down victims' personalities and rebuild them as obedient servants. Police found evidence of at least 40 victims over 3 years, all people who had been displaced by natural disasters and were seeking help from relief organizations. The victims had been sold to buyers in Europe, Asia, and the Middle East, where they were used as domestic servants, sexual slaves, or worse. Dr. Martinez was arrested and eventually extradited to face charges in several countries where her victims had been sold. But authorities believe the network included similar operations throughout the American South, specifically targeting disaster survivors who were vulnerable and isolated. Ashley survived because she recognized the signs of manipulation and took action before the psychological conditioning could be completed. But she learned that some predators use natural disasters as opportunities to collect victims who are desperate and have nowhere else to turn. And every time a hurricane, flood, or tornado strikes, there might be fake relief organizations waiting in the aftermath, offering help to people who have lost everything, including the ability to recognize when kindness is really a trap. These 5 stories reveal a pattern that should terrify anyone who's ever felt secure in their life. Predators don't just hunt randomly. They hunt strategically, targeting people who society has already abandoned. People who won't be missed, won't be searched for, won't be believed if they try to tell their stories. Kevin survived the organ harvesting ranch because he stayed alert when comfort felt too good to be true. Jennifer escaped the brainwashing farm because she refused to let them drug her into compliance. Bobby got away from the hurricane shelter because he explored when he should have been sleeping. Michael broke free from the slave labor operation because he recognized exploitation disguised as charity. And Ashley fled the research facility because she understood the difference between healing and control. But for every survivor who made it out, dozens more didn't. People whose organs were sold to the highest bidder. People whose minds were erased and rebuilt for someone else's purposes. People who were worked to death in remote locations where no one would ever find their bodies. The predators in these stories all had one thing in common. They used society's compassion against itself. They disguised their hunting as helping, their traps as salvation. They knew that desperate people would accept help from anyone, ask fewer questions, and trust more readily than they should. And they were right, because when you're sleeping in the rain, when you're starving, when you're one step away from death, a warm bed and a hot meal can blind you to the chains being wrapped around your wrists. These weren't random crimes committed by deranged individuals. These were systematic operations, carefully planned and executed by people who understood that homeless individuals make perfect victims. People who are already invisible to society, already assumed to be lost causes, already written off as statistics rather than human beings. The most terrifying truth about these stories is that they're still happening. Right now, in cities across America, there are vans driving through homeless camps, offering rides to safety. There are facilities advertising services that sound too good to be true. There are smiling faces offering exactly what desperate people need most. And some of those offers are genuine, but some of them are traps. And the people who need help the most are the least equipped to tell the difference. Tonight, when you're safe in your home, remember that security isn't just about locked doors and alarm systems. It's about having a place in society where you matter to someone, where you would be missed if you disappeared, where your absence would trigger searches and investigations and grief. Because the real horror isn't just what happened to these victims. It's how easy it was for the predators to find them, isolate them, and make them disappear without anyone noticing or caring. The streets don't just take your money, your health, and your dignity. They take your voice, your credibility, your right to be believed when something terrible happens to you. And predators know this better than anyone. So the next time you see someone sleeping rough, remember these stories. Remember that they're not just statistics or social problems. They're potential victims in a hunting ground where monsters wear the masks of saints, where salvation and damnation look exactly the same, and where the only difference between help and horror is whether you're lucky enough to recognize the trap before it closes. The hunting never stops. It just moves to new cities, new disasters, new opportunities to find people who have nowhere left to run. And in the darkness between streetlights, in the spaces where society's forgotten people try to survive another night, the predators are still out there. Still offering warm beds and hot meals. Still smiling with kindness that hides something much darker. Still hunting. If these stories made you check your locks twice, like the video, help other people discover what lurks in society's shadows. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss our descent into darkness. Share this with someone who thinks they understand how cruel the world can be. Let's see if they still think that after hearing these stories. Thanks for watching. 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 And remember, some monsters don't hide under beds. They drive rescue vans. This is Dread Dynasty.